After selling my house, I sat down with my children to divide the money from the sale. $280,000 on the table. My whole life summarized in that envelope. When I suggested keeping half for my old age, my son Mark snatched the envelope from my hands and shouted, "No, I promised my wife I'd buy her a condo a long time ago. You have social security. You'll manage." I stayed silent, completely silent, but I held on to those words. Every single one. And when he and his wife Esther returned from the real estate office days later, ready to sign the papers for their luxury condo, they were speechless when they saw what I had done. Because it turns out that a humiliated mother can be many things, but a fool isn't one of them. My name is Lilia. I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of how my own son tried to steal everything I had left and how I taught him that there are things money can't buy, like the dignity of a woman who fought her whole life. Let me tell you from the beginning. I was born in a small town where women didn't dream of being nurses. They dreamed of getting married and having kids. But I was always different. I studied at night, worked during the day, and graduated as a nurse at 23 years old. I was the first in my family to get a college degree. I met my husband, Robert, when I was 25. He was a good, hard-working, honest man. We got married and built our life brick by brick. Mark was born when I was 26 and Rachel 3 years later. We were a happy family, modest, but happy. We lived in a rented apartment, but we dreamed of owning our own home. Life was smiling on us until it wasn't. When Mark was 19 years old and Rachel was 16, Robert had a massive heart attack at work. He didn't make it to the hospital. He was 47 years old. I was widowed at 45 with 2 children who still depended on me and a rented apartment I could barely afford. I remember that night like it was yesterday, sitting in the kitchen with the funeral bills on the table, looking at the nearly empty bank account and thinking that everything was over. But it wasn't, because I had learned since I was a child that women like me don't have the luxury of giving up. The day after the funeral, I asked for double shifts at the hospital. I worked mornings, afternoons, and some nights. I slept 4 hours if I was lucky. Rachel learned to cook and take care of the house. Mark also worked part-time while he was studying engineering, or so he said. For 5 years, I lived on autopilot. Work, pay bills, sleep little, repeat. I sold the few pieces of jewelry I had, including my wedding ring. That was the hardest day, but I needed the money for the kids' college. I ate once a day so they could eat 3 times. I wore the same patched-up uniform until it fell apart. And then when I was 50 years old, a distant aunt passed away and left me a small inheritance, $30,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for the down payment on a modest house. I cried when the lawyer gave me the news, because finally, after so much sacrifice, I would have something of my own, a place to call home. I bought a small house on the outskirts of town. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen, and a yard the size of a dining room table. But it was mine. Completely mine. I spent the next 17 years paying that mortgage. Religiously. Not a single late payment. I worked until I was 65, until my body begged me to stop. But I did it. I paid off the last installment 2 years before I retried. That house saw my children grow up. It saw Mark graduate as an engineer and get a good job. It saw Rachel get her accounting degree and open her own office. That house saw me grow old alone, but proud because I had kept my promise. My children were professionals. They had futures. They had more than I ever had. Mark married Esther 5 years ago. A 38-year-old woman, educated, always well-dressed, with a perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. From day one, she treated me with that cold politeness that people use when they consider you inferior. Mother-in-law, she'd call me, with that sweet little tone that sounded like condescension. But I wanted to believe she was good for my son. Rachel, my youngest, never married. She lived alone in an apartment near her office, visited every Sunday, and was the only one who really asked how I was, not how my health was, or if I needed anything. She asked how my heart was, if I was happy, if I was sleeping well. Rachel truly knew me. Mark had changed since he married Esther. His visits became sporadic. When he came, he was always in a hurry. And he always ended up talking about money, about how much it cost to maintain their lifestyle, about how expensive everything was, about how Esther deserved better things. The truth I refused to see was simple and painful. My son had become greedy. It all started about a year ago when Esther began visiting my house more often. She'd arrive with little cakes, with coffee, with that rehearsed smile. She would sit in my living room and look around as if she were evaluating every inch. Such a big house for just one person, mother-in-law. She'd say, "Don't you get lonely here?" At first, I thought it was genuine concern. How naive I was. Rachel warned me. "Mom, that woman is measuring your house like it's already hers," she told me one Sunday. But I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to believe my daughter-in-law could be so calculating. Then Mark started with the hints. "Mom, at your age, what do you need so much space for?" "Mom, this house is worth a lot of money now. The neighborhood has been gentrified." "Mom, you could sell and live in a more comfortable apartment. No stairs, no yard to take care of." Every visit was the same song, the same pressure disguised as concern. And I, like a fool, started to consider it. Esther was more direct one day. She arrived alone without Mark with that same smile. "Mother-in-law, I have to confess something," she said, taking my hand with those perfectly painted coral-colored nails. "I'm pregnant." My heart leaped. I was going to be a grandmother, but we don't have anywhere proper to live. Mark is devastated because he promised me he would buy me a house before we had children. Her eyes filled with tears. Perfect tears that didn't ruin her makeup. There it was. The bait, the perfectly set trap. And I almost fell for it. I almost told her I would sell the house and help them. Almost. But something in my gut stopped me. A little voice told me, "Lilia, don't be a fool. This smells fishy." So, I just nodded and told her I would think about it. I called Rachel the next day. I told her everything. There was a long silence. Then, I heard a sigh. "Mom, that woman isn't pregnant. She's manipulating you. I saw her 3 days ago drinking wine at a restaurant." I felt the floor move beneath my feet. Esther had lied about a pregnancy. But I didn't say anything. I didn't confront anyone. I waited and I kept waiting as the pressure mounted. Mark called Ed every 2 days. "Have you thought about the house, Mom?" Esther sent texts. I even received brochures for senior living homes in the mail. Brochures I hadn't asked for. A month later, I made the decision I would sell the house, but not for the reasons they thought. I would sell it because I needed to know how far my son would go. I needed to see his true face. I hired a real estate agent. I put the house up for sale and I waited. The house sold in 3 weeks, $280,000. The day the sale was finalized, I called my 2 children and asked them to come to the house that afternoon. We needed to talk about the money. Rachel arrived first, worried. Mom, are you sure about this? I squeezed her hand and nodded. I need to know the truth, honey. Mark and Esther arrived together 40 minutes late. Esther was wearing an elegant green dress. Mark wore that smile that used to melt my heart when he was a boy. But now, I only saw calculation behind it. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where we had eaten dinner thousands of times. I put the envelope with the check in the center. Everyone stared at it. The silence was thick. I took a deep breath and said, "This money represents every double shift I worked, every meal I skipped, every dream I postponed. Now I want to divide it fairly." I paused. I propose I keep $140,000 for my old age for medical emergencies to live with dignity, and I'll divide the other $140,000 between you two. $70,000 for each of you. What happened next changed everything. Mark shot up from his chair so abruptly it nearly fell over. His face turned red, the veins in his neck standing out like tense ropes. $140,000 for you? He practically spat the words. What do you need so much money for at your age, Mom? Esther placed her hand on Mark's arm, but it wasn't a calming gesture. It was one of support, of complicity. Rachel looked at me with wide eyes, as if telling me without words. I warned you. I tried to keep my voice steady. Mark, I am 67 years old. That house was my only asset. I need that money to pay rent, for medicine, to live. I don't know how many years I have left, but I want to live them with dignity. My voice broke a little at the end, but I continued. $70,000 is more than generous for each of you. It's money I never had at your age. Esther leaned forward with that fake expression of concern I now knew so well. Mother-in-law, but you have Social Security. You have a steady income every month. We have huge expenses. Our apartment rent, Mark's car payments, my fertility treatments. There it was again. The pregnancy lie transformed into fertility treatments. This woman was a manipulative artist. Mom, Mark interrupted. And there was something in his tone I had never heard before. Something cold, something calculated. You know, I promised Esther I'd buy her a condo. I promised her when we got married. She quit her job to be with me, to take care of me, to be my wife. I owe her that. He paused and looked me straight in the eyes. We found the perfect condo. $150,000 with your half and a little more. We could buy it. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel opened her mouth to say something, but I stopped her with a gesture. I needed to hear this. I needed Mark to say out loud what he really wanted. You're asking me for my entire share of the money? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'm not asking you for anything, Mom. I'm telling you the reality. His voice was hard now with no pretense of kindness. You get $800 from Social Security every month. That's more than enough for one person. We don't have anything secure. My job could end tomorrow. We need that security. We need that condo. He stared at the envelope on the table with an intensity that gave me chills. Besides, you paid for that house with the inheritance money from Aunt Martha. It wasn't just your effort. It was luck. I felt as if I had been slapped. Rachel shot to her feet. How dare you? she yelled at her brother. Mom worked 17 years paying off that mortgage. 17 years without missing a single payment. And don't you call it luck? Where were you when she was working double shifts? Where were you when she skipped meals so we could eat? Mark turned to his sister with contempt. You were always her favorite, Rachel. Always defending her. But I know the truth. Mom has enough money to live. I don't. I have a wife to support, a future to build. I'm not going to apologize for wanting more out of life. I'm not asking you to apologize for wanting more, I said finally, and my voice sounded calmer than I felt. I'm asking you to understand that I also deserve security, that I also worked my whole life, that this money is mine by right, Esther chimed in with that soft, venomous voice. No one is saying you don't deserve anything, mother-in-law. Just that, well, you've already lived your life. You've raised your children. You had your marriage. You worked. Now it's our turn. It's Mark's turn to have what you had. A home of his own. A stable family. Don't you want that for your son? The manipulation was so obvious, it almost hurt physically. But what hurt most was seeing Mark nod along with every word his wife said, as if she was speaking universal truths instead of selfish lies. Of course, I want Mark to be happy, I replied slowly. But not at the cost of my own survival. Survival? Mark let out a bitter laugh. So dramatic. Mom, you're not on the street. You're not starving. We are just asking you to be reasonable, to think about your family, your son, or does Rachel matter more to you than I do? There it was. The attempt to pit me against my daughter, the divide and conquer tactic. But I knew that game. I had seen it before in manipulative patients at the hospital, in relatives fighting over inheritances, in people who used love as a weapon. This has nothing to do with preferences, I said firmly. It has to do with justice, with fairness, with respect. I placed my hands on the envelope as if protecting it. The answer is no, Mark. I am not giving you my share of the money, $70,000 is what you will receive, and you should be grateful for that. What happened next still keeps me up at night when I remember it. Mark lunged across the table with a speed I didn't expect from my son. He snatched the envelope from under my hands with such force that my fingers scraped against the wood. Rachel screamed. I sat paralyzed, staring at my empty hands on the table. No! Mark shouted, holding the envelope against his chest as if it were a treasure he had just conquered. I promised my wife I'd buy her a condo a long time ago. I promised her, Mom, don't you understand that a promise is a promise? His face was distorted by rage, by frustration, by something I didn't recognize in my son. You have social security. You'll manage. You always managed. Esther stood up beside him. And on her face, there was no surprise, no shock at her husband's violent action. There was only satisfaction, as if this was exactly what she had planned. Mark is right, mother-in-law. You're strong. You've always been. We need this money more than you do. It's that simple. Rachel tried to grab the envelope from Mark, but he shoved her. My daughter stumbled backward, hitting the wall. That snapped me out of my paralysis. I stood up with a speed I didn't know I still had. Mark, that is theft. That money is mine. It's ours, he corrected, stuffing the envelope inside his jacket. It's the family's, and I'm part of this family.